What's one moment that made you go, that's it, I'm done?
I should have known the minute the church basement doors sighed open and the smell of overfrosted sheet cake and coffee that tasted like cardboard hit me that the night would be another polite little reminder that in this family I am a background chair. Useful when there aren't enough seats and invisible when there are. Yet I still smoothed my dress, kissed Grandma on her powdery cheek, and slid into the folding chair row while Aunt Linda tested the microphone and announced that every grandchild would get a special mention because 85 comes once and it is time to honor legacies, and I smiled like a person who believes in fair play even while somewhere under the ribs something braced for impact. They went alphabetically, which is a treacherous system when your cousins are named after saints and you are named after a weather pattern. So I listened as Adam's Bar Association award got a round of applause that would have woken the nursery in the back hallway. And Beth's new baby was passed around like a sacred relic with a crocheted blanket worthy of a museum, and Connor's promotion at the insurance company earned a standing ovation, like he had cured something more serious than people's deductibles. And I kept clapping because that's what you do when the family has arranged a parade and forgot to hand you a baton. Grandma's voice, thin and bright as a teaspoon on china, kept warming to each story, adding little details the way she adds butter to every vegetable. And it was almost sweet the way she remembered who won which spelling bee in 6th grade and who made varsity and who still calls her every Thursday, and I watched her eyes dart over me the way a person looks at a wall thermostat they assume is working fine. Not worth the tap. I am not a tragic case. I pay my rent on time. I have a job that is not glamorous, but pays for groceries without me performing arithmetic in the dairy aisle, and I do not require rescue missions or bail. Yet you would not have known I exist if you had come in late and stood by the Costco cake with the blue roses and listened to the lengthening list of golden children. Because after the cousins with babies, and the cousins with houses, and the cousin who won a fellowship in a field, only 3 people at the party understood. Aunt Linda clicked to the next slide and said, and finally, then went to the closing prayer while the room hummed with the soft noise of plates and plastic forks, and for a second I thought maybe there was a second deck of slides waiting. A secret round where those of us who hadn't made a baby or bought a pellet smoker still got a nod. But the prayer said amen, and the music turned up and Grandma's hand squeezed mine and she said, "You look lovely, dear," in the tone you use for a neighbor's petunia basket. I did what I always do when my cheeks are burning and there are cameras out, which is to smile the safe smile and lean into the frame with whatever prop is nearest, in this case a balloon arch that shed confetti like a stressed-out piñata. And I asked Uncle Gary to tap the portrait mode because the basement lighting was cruel, and I tilted my head the way every beauty blogger says looks friendly and confident, and I took my own little picture with Grandma in the background like a saint in stained glass, and I hugged her again because she is still my grandma even when she forgets my whole autobiography, and I said my goodbyes early because I cannot be trusted around buttercream when my feelings have teeth. In the car, I let the heater run because my hands were shaking, and I told myself it was the draft from the vestibule and not the old anger that lives between my shoulder blades like a knot you can't stretch out. And I scrolled through the photos and picked the one where the balloon caught the light and the corners of my mouth didn't betray the sting, and I opened the app that always seems harmless until it is not, the one that knows who looked at what and when. And I typed a caption that sounded pretty enough to put on a greeting card while still carrying a little blade tucked inside the envelope. 85 years, a lifetime of stories, and somehow mine is still waiting its turn. I added a heart because America believes hearts absolve everything and tagged the location because the church has a very specific carpet and I wanted certain people to feel the recognition in their knees. And I hit post with the kind of calm you only get when you've decided not to cry, and then I drove home past dark storefronts and a minivan idling outside a pizza place and a teenager in a varsity jacket carrying a cardboard box like a crown. And I let myself think maybe that will be the end of it. A small release valve, a gentle hiss of air to keep me from exploding, a paper cut of revenge that only I would feel was revenge. The likes showed up before I took off my coat, little taps from cousins who live for affirmation, and a careful heart from Aunt Linda that felt like she was sniffing the air for smoke. And a comment from a high school friend who remembers me as the girl who always held the camera and always volunteered to run the bake sale because she couldn't stand to be on stage. I poured tea, the cheap grocery kind that stains mugs and nerves, and reread the caption to make sure it didn't sound deranged. And I laughed once in that breathless way you do when you are either very brave or very foolish. And I told myself I had simply written the truth in a dress shirt. Then my phone buzzed with the aggressive insistence of an appliance about to flood the kitchen, and my brother's name filled the screen with a string of frantic punctuation and a single line that slapped harder than any speech from a mic. Take down that post. My brother's message landed with the blunt urgency of a smoke alarm that knows something you do not, and because I've spent a lifetime being the family's reliable shock absorber, I did the opposite of what he expected, which was not to apologize or scramble for a polite explanation, but to set the phone face down on the counter and let the kettle rattle while I rinsed lipstick off a mug and told myself that if a sentence on a public page could make a grown man panic, then perhaps I had finally written something with a little vertebrae, and when the phone buzzed again, I picked it up slowly, like a person lifting a lid off a pot they suspect might hiss. He had followed the command with a barrage of pretexts and pleas that smelled faintly of spilled gasoline, long lines about how Grandma was delicate and tonight had meant the world to her, and how I was making this about me which, he said, was not elegant. And then a strangely specific note about relatives who watch everything and do not need to start any conversations, which read less like brotherly concern and more like someone trying to keep a lid on the compost bin during a windstorm. I typed the blandest reply I could conjure, because blandness draws out truth the way salt draws water from eggplant, and I told him the post was just a picture and a feeling on a long night, and that I loved Grandma and had left early because the cake was too sweet, which was true in the way those polite lies at Christmas are true, and then I went back to the app and watched the comments behave like a school of fish sensing a shadow, first darting in for a nibble and then veering away in synchronized suspicion, and there, under Aunt Linda's careful heart, sat a comment from Beth, the cousin with the crocheted blanket and the newborn halo, who wrote, "Interesting choice of words. A phrase that in our family is the equivalent of sliding a chair under a door handle." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the neatness of it felt like a sitcom whose laugh track comes on 2 beats early, and I tapped into the edit function and added a line that could be read as gratitude or as a breadcrumb, depending on the reader's appetite. Loved hearing about legacies tonight. So many stories, so many threads. I'm excited to see how they all tie together. The little pencil icon announced to the world that I had adjusted something, which in that particular ecosystem is like ringing a dinner bell, and likes trickled in from acquaintances who enjoy a gentle stir as much as they enjoy a half-off candle at Target. And then a message arrived from a cousin who never writes me unless he needs an extra ticket to a concert, asking if I was okay, which I answered with a thumbs up because sometimes you have to let people receive exactly what they ask for. Nothing more, nothing less, but behind the screen I was humming with a nervous energy that made me pace the rectangle between the stove and the sink like I was training for a sport that only exists in suburban kitchens. The family group thread, which usually sleeps until holidays and yard sales, started twitching with photos from the party and auntly declarations about how blessed we are, and a single line from Grandma's number, clearly typed by a helper because punctuation was involved, thanked everyone for making her feel special, which I read twice for the faint outline of omission and then set aside because I did not come here for full closure. I came for the slow, clean satisfaction of cause and effect. When my brother called, I let it ring until the voicemail took it, not to be cruel, but to slow the tempo so that he could hear his own footsteps in the hallway, and in the message he said my name the way you say the name of a dog that is chewing the corner of the couch, then warned me that I did not understand what I had hinted at, that words have consequences, and that there were documents involved, and the way he tripped over that last part made a little bell go off in my head, the bell that sounds whenever a person who has benefited from the family magic starts talking around the word fairness, as if it were a live wire. I called him back with my voice set to gentle, the same voice I use when I'm negotiating a return without a receipt, and I told him I would be happy to discuss any specific concern he had if he would speak plainly, which he would not. Because plainly is where the footprints show, so we danced that little Midwestern two-step where everyone claims to be reasonable, while hiding utensils behind their backs. I ended the call by telling him the post was staying up because it was my evening and my sentence, and that if he felt unwell, he could log off and drink water. Then I hung up before his protest could congeal into another lecture, and I did the small, sharp thing that felt like rinsing a glass with cold water after someone left a film on it. I pinned the photo to the top of my profile so that any relative cruising by on a wave of curiosity would see it first, and I swapped the single image for a carousel that began with the balloon selfie and then quietly included, as the second slide, a sun-faded snapshot from Grandma's kitchen years ago where the refrigerator in the background wore a blizzard of magnet-clipped notes. And if you zoomed even a little, you could read the one that said, "Meeting Thursday with Mike about the cabin paperwork," which in our family is an entire soap opera written on one index card. I did not explain it. I did not caption the second slide. I simply let it exist. With the same patience I have had to practice since childhood, and then I washed my mug, folded the dish towel in a neat rectangle, and allowed myself the modest, fizzy relief of a tiny revenge that does not draw blood but absolutely leaves a mark. While the notifications began to stutter like a car refusing to stall and a final message from my brother arrived that did not bother with punctuation at all, only my name stretched out like a warning and the promise that Mom was calling in 5. Which, if you know our family, is not a promise so much as the opening bell. Mom's call came in with the strained brightness she uses when she is trying to keep polite company from smelling smoke, and I let it ring twice, so I could rehearse the version of myself that sounds calm and reasonable even when my chest feels like a drawer that won't close. Then answered with a hello that could have been poured over ice, and she launched into the familiar monologue about how nights like these are for celebrating and how social media is a poor substitute for real conversations. And how my caption had put a damper on Grandma's glow because people read into things, and I said that if people were reading into things perhaps there were things to read. After which she sighed the long motherly sigh that translates to "please stop being difficult and return to your regularly scheduled invisibility." Yet, somewhere under her patient scolding was a tremor that interested me more than any defense of sheet cake and family unity. She asked me, in a voice that tried very hard not to sound like a warning, to take down the post because it was creating talk, and when I asked which talk and from whom, she said that naming names was not constructive, which is the precise phrase our family uses when the names would be too revealing. So I said I would consider it, and we hung up in that brittle peace that passes for affection when everyone has something to protect. I did not post again. I opened a different tab and did what women do when they have been overlooked for long enough to become excellent researchers, which is to track breadcrumbs with unromantic efficiency. Because the second slide in my carousel had not been a random nostalgia grab, it had been a reminder to myself that Grandma's refrigerator had been a bulletin board for years, and my brain, trained by a life of noticing the background because the foreground rarely belonged to me, had already clocked the date on the card about the cabin paperwork and the name Mike, the same Mike who used to grill hot dogs at the lake and now wore suits that went shiny at the elbows. County property records, as it turns out, are not guarded by trolls or dragons. They are guarded by indifferent search bars and PDF viewers that load like they are hauling a piano. And after a few false starts and a misspelling that gave me someone else's divorce, I found a neat little trail of documents that included a line with my brother's name and a phrase that might as well have been printed in blinking neon: quitclaim deed, witnessed and notarized on a Thursday in early summer, the same week Grandma missed our standing phone call and later said she had been tired. I stared at the screen long enough for the tea to go cold and the anger to sharpen from a dull ache into something clean and almost pleasant. And I read the names again and thought about the speeches I had clapped for and the way everyone at the party had arranged themselves around the mythology of fairness. And I felt that mean little bubble of humor rise because if life insists on treating you like a side character, you might as well master the art of the aside. So I took a screenshot of the public record and saved it without any intention of posting it because even I have lines, but I did allow myself a small, elegant push that would travel further than a caption while still looking like a joke. The digital equivalent of tapping a glass with a spoon and watching everyone glance up. I opened the payment app that thinks money is just another form of conversation and sent my brother a request for $120, which is not a fortune, but is enough to be noticed in a family that debates the price of folding chairs. And in the memo line I wrote, as innocently as if I were splitting a dinner check, cabin utilities June through August, my share, thanks. Because I still possess a sense of humor that borders on housekeeping, I set the transaction privacy to friends so that anyone remotely connected could see a whisper of what I was getting at without being handed the sermon notes. Then I put the phone down and let the invisible wind carry it, and it carried faster than I expected because within minutes a cousin liked the transaction the way people like announcements of puppies. And an old neighbor who babysat us once left a smiley that felt like she had no idea she had stepped into a minefield. And then Aunt Linda texted me not through the group thread but directly, with a line that tried very hard to be friendly yet tripped over a pothole. "Sweetheart, not sure what you're implying, but these jokes can be misread," to which I replied with sugar about how I was simply settling up because family finances should be transparent, a sentence that tasted like a lemon wedge dragged across a cut. My brother did not respond in the app, which would have created a helpful public trail. He called, and when I declined, he sent a new text that wore its panic like a wet shirt, telling me I was playing with fire and I did not understand what Grandma had intended, and that the word intended was doing a lot of lifting for a person not named in the deed. Made me think about intention like a locked drawer that someone swears is full of blessings, so I let him stew while I opened my photos and cropped the second slide just enough that the index card's date and the name Mike stood alone. Then I replaced the second image with the cropped version so that anyone who went looking would be rewarded for their curiosity, which in my book counts as civic engagement. Notifications began to multiply like fruit flies. The group chat started chiming with vague morality plays about grace and forgiveness, and just as I was wondering whether to put the kettle back on, a new message arrived from a number not in my contacts, a polite little sentence that was all ice and no water. "Please remove any images of my name from your page. Signed, very properly, Michael P., attorney." And even though the request was smartly couched, the timing told me I had found the right Mike, which meant I had also hit a nerve, and the night, which had begun with a cake and a prayer, was clearly marching toward something that would not fit on a paper plate. The attorney's text sat on my screen like a glass of water on a white tablecloth, looking harmless while threatening a spreading stain, and because I've learned that a certain kind of man in a suit expects a woman like me to apologize first and breathe second, I took a very long breath and answered with the politeness of a church usher while choosing each word like a bead on a wire, telling him that the image in question was a casual family snapshot posted in a personal capacity, that any visible names appeared incidentally and without commentary, and that if he had a specific legal concern he could kindly articulate the statute rather than rely on a tone that sounded an awful lot like a warning dressed as courtesy. Then I put the phone down and allowed myself a laugh that had more iron than air in it, because I understood that what rattled him was not the picture, it was the fact that I had found the door into the room where they kept the extra keys. The group chat continued to bubble with declarations about love and legacy and the importance of keeping family matters in the family, a phrase that in our house has always meant the people at the table decide what counts as a plate, and the more those messages stacked up the sharper my vision got. Because nothing focuses a person like years of being assured they are misreading the menu. I knew better than to post documents, not because I feared being scolded, but because a paper waved in the air becomes the story, and I wanted the story to remain what it was. A question about visibility and what happens when the overlooked hold up a mirror that catches the corner others prefer stay in the shade, so I did something smaller and far more annoying. The kind of revenge that lives in domestic minor keys and nevertheless changes the tune, by opening a shared photo album with the warmest possible title, Grandma's Fridge Museum, and populating it with a dozen soft, affectionate images from that kitchen taken over many summers. The kind where flour dust hangs in late afternoon sun and somebody's elbow is always in the frame because that is how families cook, and right in the middle, not first and not last. I placed the cropped snapshot of the index card with the Thursday note to meet about the cabin, then invited the entire clan with a message about making sure our memories were saved before the handwriting faded, a sentence that wrapped a bow around a small stick of dynamite and handed it to the people who had taught me to smile while swallowing sparks. The album link went off like a quiet firecracker, not loud enough to wake the neighbors and exactly loud enough to jolt the people wearing headphones, and I watched the tiny profile dots appear as they joined. Then the brief flurry of heart reactions on the flower-dusted photos as everyone raced to establish wholesome participation before they scrolled to the index card and felt their mouths get dry, which is when my phone began to chime in a rhythm that felt like a second heartbeat, first from Beth with a watery comment about how Grandma's grocery lists were works of art, then from Connor with a joke about magnet architecture that landed like wet toast, and then a private message from Aunt Linda asking me to remove anything that might be taken out of context, a request that told me the right context had already been supplied at some kitchen table I had not been invited to. I responded with the breezy tone of a recipe share, assuring her that the album was a simple family archive and that if any image made her uncomfortable, she could of course mute it, which sounded helpful and felt like setting down a coaster after the drink has already left a ring. To keep the tone contained while moving the ball decisively, I performed the small theater of capitulation in public by editing my original caption to add a sentimental line about gratitude for sturdy women and handwritten notes. Then, with a timing only pettiness and patience can teach, I briefly archived the post so that those who had worked themselves into a lather could exhale, and 5 minutes later, after the first "thank you for listening" reached my inbox, I unarchived it with the new caption and the album link, which is a little like closing a window and opening the door across the hall. Different gesture, same weather. Notifications began to multiply again, joined now by a curious subset of acquaintances who had no stake in our saga and therefore offered the most dangerous commodity of all, unvarnished interpretation. And right on schedule, my brother called using video as if the addition of his face would soften his message, telling me with inappropriate cheer that we should grab coffee tomorrow and chat, while his eyes flicked right and left like he was watching a game no one else could see, after which he dropped the cheer and asked me point blank what I thought I knew and why I was stirring a pot that would splash on all of us. A phrasing that confirmed there was indeed a pot and that he was close enough to feel the heat. Because revenge that lands softly has a way of echoing longer than a shout, I told him I would gladly meet, and before we hung up I performed the smallest, sharpest act I had planned all night, the one designed to slide under the skin without drawing visible blood. By opening the same payment app and splitting my earlier request into tidy monthly entries labeled with the cabin street name and the utility in question, then toggling the visibility to friends of friends and adding a cheerful memo about reconciling summer charges in the spirit of fairness, a phrase that I knew would travel through the family like a draft, unnoticed by strangers and unavoidable to the right eyes. The group chat went momentarily silent, a hush that read like everyone holding their breath while calculating what others might be seeing, and into that hush came a new notification from Grandma's number, 3 short sentences that did not sound like her at all, thanking everyone for their kindness, reminding us to honor decisions already made, and asking specifically that I stop posting refrigerator pictures because there are better ways to communicate. A chilly little note whose final period felt like a knuckle tapped against a table. And as I stood in my quiet kitchen with the album open and the kettle cooling and the cabinets reflecting the phone's glow, someone knocked on my door with the steady certainty of a person who believes they are arriving in time to stop a storm, and when I looked through the peephole and saw my brother standing there with a man in a suit I recognized from the grill at the lake, I understood that the conversation I had been told to keep off the internet had arrived in my hallway wearing cologne and urgency. They brought the smell of winter air and urgency into my hallway, my brother shifting from one foot to the other like a schoolboy caught with a pocket full of firecrackers, and Mike, the same Mike who used to overcook hot dogs at the lake and now carried a leather portfolio like it was diplomatic luggage, offered me a smile that had all the right teeth and none of the right temperature. So I stepped back and let them in because sometimes the most efficient kind of revenge begins with courtesy. And I set 3 mugs on the counter as if this were merely coffee among reasonable adults, while I tucked my phone under a mail pile where it could still hear every syllable. Mike started first, talking in sentences that had been ironed flat, about context and privacy and how family decisions deserve dignity, which I translated as I stirred sugar into my own cup. Into please stop showing people the edges of a contract they were never meant to see, and when he finished with a gentle suggestion that I remove any images that could lead to misinterpretation, my brother jumped in with the messy part, telling me I was ruining Grandma's week and that I did not understand what she wanted, and I said the only thing I could say without swallowing my tongue, which was that I understood plenty because county recorders do not lie and neither do index cards, and that if the desire was to keep dignity intact then perhaps the plan should not have been executed alongside a magnet shaped like a strawberry. I did not raise my voice. I laid out my terms like a grocery list because drama exhausts me and lists get things done, telling them I would leave everything exactly as it was, no new posts, no documents, no captions with blades tucked inside. If 3 simple acts of housekeeping were performed in the bright light of Sunday afternoon. First, a family message sent to the full group, acknowledging that the cabin's future had been discussed without all interested parties present and that a neutral attorney, not related by friendship or marriage, would be retained to review what had been signed. Second, a transparent ledger for all cabin-related expenses and use, shared with every cousin and aunt and bored nephew who wanted it. Because sunlight is cheaper than therapy. Third, an open toast at Grandma's lunch next weekend where each grandchild would be named and honored, including the one who pays her rent on time and shows up when no one is looking, after which the subject of legacies would be declared off-limits to committees that meet behind refrigerators. My brother's mouth opened and closed like a fish testing air while Mike asked, in a tone that could have polished silver, whether I truly wished to make private matters public, and I reminded him that nothing I had touched was private, that the only private thing in the entire affair had been the courtesy I had shown by not uploading PDFs with signatures, and that courtesy, once wrung out, tends to dry to something stiff and less generous next time. I told them, because I believe in fair warning, that I had scheduled a neat little draft to send to the extended relatives early Monday morning, a link to the county portal and a sentence about why transparency is a kindness, but that I was perfectly willing to cancel the send if they delivered on my list by Sunday 12, which sounded theatrical and was, in fact, simply the most efficient timer I own. And I watched as Mike did the lawyer math of outcomes and optics while my brother rubbed his forehead and muttered that I was impossible, which I let sit unchallenged, because women are called impossible at the precise moment men discover their possibilities have limits. We sat in that humming quiet that falls when power rearranges itself by a few degrees, and then my brother exhaled in a way I had not heard since we were children hiding in a closet during a thunderstorm, and he said they would handle the message and the ledger, and that he would make sure the toast happened, and that I could please take down the album in the meantime, and I said no to the album because memories belong to everybody, though I did offer to move the index card photo to the end, which is the kind of compromise that looks small and feels like reclaiming a square of ground. Sunday arrived like a stage light coming up too hot. The group text pinged with a carefully worded paragraph about fairness and review that carried Aunt Linda's perfume even if it bore my brother's name. A shared spreadsheet appeared with tabs for utilities and repairs and weeks at the lake that made me smile, because watching people who avoided balance sheets suddenly embrace them is a particular flavor of petty justice. And at the church hall, Grandma's lunch unfolded with the same meatballs and scalloped potatoes and the same white tablecloths that never quite lie flat, except this time my brother stood up, clinked a fork against a glass, and spoke my name without flinching, saying that families tell stories to keep each other alive and that sometimes we forget to include a chapter that was carrying more than its share of weight. After which he raised his glass to me and Grandma squeezed my hand with a pressure that said she remembered something she had not intended to forget. The toast did not fix history, it did not rearrange paperwork, it did not make me a landowner or his favorite, but it did a very American thing by admitting, out loud, that an error had been made and that the correction would be visible. And after the clapping faded and the napkins were folded, I asked Aunt Linda to take a picture of me and Grandma by the new balloon arch, and I posted it, not with a knife tucked in the words, but with a line that would still wake certain phones in the night. New. Card on the fridge, legacies go where everyone can read them. That night, I received 2 messages before sleep, one from Mike confirming a meeting with the independent attorney and another, handwritten on a photo from Grandma's flip phone. A picture of a blank index card on a clean refrigerator with a single sentence in her careful script, "We will write this properly," which I read twice before turning off the light. And sometime after midnight, my brother sent me a text without punctuation that began with my name and ended with, "You have no idea what you started." A sentence that could be either a promise or a threat depending on the weather, and I lay very still in the dark, hearing nothing but the building's quiet plumbing and my own steady breath, wondering whether I had set us all free or simply opened a door to a room that had been waiting, patient and windowless, for years.